Dark clouds above and a bit of rain falling and dark clouds over the game this week. It's been a troubling few days with the release of the ICEC report. It was commissioned a couple of years ago to look at the state of equity in the game, and it revealed that the game is riven by racism, sexism and class-based discrimination. To discuss that and more, lots of stories in the papers this week. I've got Arfan Akram, who is a cricket operations manager for East London, works with ICEC, Mel and Rory, who's the cricket correspondent of the Press Association. There's the stories, many of them, but there's one in The Guardian. Mihir Bose has tackled the ICEC report, fixing cricket's old boys club problem starts at the tea break. That sparked a lively debate in the letters section of The Guardian. A level playing field for cricket is a long way off. Many letters about cricket and the ICEC report. I might just start by asking each of you, actually, from your perspective, specific perspective, you as a man of Muslim faith, Mel as a woman of colour, Rory as a state-educated working class lad, whether and how far the report reflects your experiences of your journey into the game and current experiences in the game. Arfan.
Yeah, Mike, I think I'm sort of a second-generation cricketer in the family, so I inherited a lot of those thoughts that have been mentioned in the report. It is damning, and that's really important at this stage, when currently we're in a moment of reflection. But what it does is captured a historic time of what's happened within cricket, and that's really important for me. I think the reflections have evolved over time. They've obviously become less and less, but quite far from being eradicated, and there are institutionally a few issues that need to be hired at, and I think the ICC report has done really well in capturing that.
Well, we'll look at some of the specifics in a minute. Mel.
100%. And I think when I think about the report, when you first read it, it really slaps you in the face. And I think a lot of that was because of the language being used, and they had to use that language because a couple of 24, 48 hours after sort of it all sinking in, I'm sitting there reading it and I'm going, well, this is what we've experienced all the time. So they needed the language to shake the tree a little bit, because if you didn't use that, then we'd still be in the same situation of going, excuse me, have you heard about, or did you know about this group? And that's the shift for me, the sort of the stick in the spoke of the wheel, just to turn things up a little bit to go, okay, here we go. And the other big part for me is that it uncovers the communities within it. Like, so often we rely on a couple of voices at the top, but sometimes we're quite removed from certain situations as well. So what the report is allowed to do with the 4,000 odd interviews is really drill down to a broader base of issues as well, so that then we can actually tackle it, not just from a blanket, oh, we need to put a program in here for women and for people of colour. We actually need to say, well, here's a program, but in this area it's for this group of people, and for over here it's slightly different. So it's going to be a tough piece to address, but we've now got at least a paper to say it needs to be done.
Rory?
Yeah, I was pleased to see the class element addressed to the extent that it was in this. I think it's no surprise, no shock to anyone to hear that class is an issue in cricket. It's an issue in British society as a whole, and if I had one sort of curiosity about the report, which was pretty strong and pretty good, it was the fact that the foreword was written by John Major, who, with the best will in the world, played a role in selling off 10,000 school playing fields. And if you want to drill down and find out a little bit about the class issues and maybe why state school kids aren't playing as much cricket as we'd like them to, that's a starting point. So a bit odd. I also think cricket has a case to answer with diversity at its boardroom level, its advisors, its steering groups, all these things, because sometimes they don't mind having some women on their board. They don't mind having some people who are non-white on their board, but ideally they won't have different life experience. They will present the same. They will have similar thoughts and similar views and won't necessarily rock the boat. And I think once you add in the spice of the class issue, you might hear a little bit different opinion and get some different outcomes.
Well, let's drill down a bit there, Arfan. Mel said that sometimes we're removed from what's going on at the ground. You are right there running community programmes in East London. You run the Leighton Hub, which was set up by the ECB through their South Asian plan, which was 2018, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
What are the biggest challenges for you running those community programs?
If I sort of go a little bit chronologically, I think 10 years ago, when we looked at this, and we did a simple mapping exercise, and we looked around, participation, talent pathway, access to the game, it was very, very, very obvious that from our perspective at Essex, East London was producing a high volume of participants. It was producing a high volume of players onto the pathway, and it was also producing a high volume of passionate people who love the game of cricket. Yet at that time, we had a appointed member of staff who was overseeing cricket in the region. So there lies the first problem around giving it the attention it deserves. I think the next 3 or 4 years was tough because there was a lot of apologising, and obviously reading Richard Gould's letter I thought was really powerful, and time will tell, hopefully, fingers crossed, in a positive way of the impact. But that first period of apologising and then effectively being on the back foot allowed us an opportunity of education and learning. That was critical for us. That learning enabled us to understand what were the real challenges, not the perceived challenges from an ivory towers, Chelmsford Central Office 32 miles away from Leighton. And we did some low-hanging fruit, some really good initial engagements. But through that period, we started to develop some really passionate people who love the game. No different to you and I and others who are privileged now to be involved in the game. And that then enabled us to go and share those experiences to the top, to the ECB. And then the South Asian Action Plan, I think that was the first point, a critical point, where I think the governing body said there is a challenge, an issue. And if you, at that time, we're talking 30 to 40% of participation was from South Asians. There's only 2 million South Asians in the country. You break that stat down to the wider demographic, that's a huge population. And I know we're going to talk about players from black background, which is even more damning when you look at the data. So Leighton enabled us two things. One was to work on that education piece, so it enabled us and the local ownership, the local community to look at usage, look at type of programs we want to play, and most important to us is what are our core collective values to make that successful. And the local authority played an influential role, but ECB did take a risk, if I'm being really honest, at that time, and we're grateful. I think cricket in the region's grateful, but it allowed all of our performance programs to be 3 miles from home maximum rather than 30 miles. It enabled us to do a Tuesday, 3:59 on a Tuesday, I am banned from Leighton because it's a women and girls takeover. From 4 o'clock to 9 o'clock, pathways, communities, national programs, whatever it might be. But again, that's education from the bottom up, not the top down telling you what to do. And the stats are really, really powerful for Leighton, but actually that I think is a sample of what's happening already over the last couple of years up and down the country, whether it's Birmingham and Leicester and other parts.
Can I just show you a tweet that you sent out the other day? It was a lovely tweet, really, a photograph of yourself, Adam Patel, a journalist from the Daily Mail, and Moeen Ali. And Lords had set aside a place for Eid prayers. Now, Lords and the MCC get a lot of flack in this report. It is pretty unsparing on the club, but you suggest there that at least there's a growing awareness or sensitivity of cultural differences. I mentioned your faith, for example. You're currently liaising for the Australian team, but you did do so for Pakistan's team recently. Around the grounds for a team like Pakistan, is there adequate provision for your faith?
Yeah, 2 points. I think intent is the first one. I think what was really pleasing for me was with the MCC, I didn't have to ask. It was a direct communication to say, we know it's Eid coming up this week, so we've organised an imam for players, staff, and obviously members of the public. And we also know that Friday is a critical part. And for me, that was so powerful, where MCC Lords Cricket Ground was saying to us, this has been created. We're aware of what's happening during this week under probably 4 years of planning for an Ashes week. You make a really good point. I think one of the biggest educations and learnings for me was when Pakistan came over during COVID times, there was a real investment in making sure that they had as good an experience in a bubble as one can. Whether we looked at other teams having golf simulators and lots of stuff. And it was absolutely paramount, and that Pakistan being a Muslim country and faith and religion was so important. And every single venue I worked for, whether it was Worcester and Derby or whether it was the test grounds in that time, Old Trafford and Southampton, that they had provisions in place for those players of the Muslim faith for Friday prayers, but not just Friday prayers, every day, 5 days a week. A dedicated space was put together. The food catering was all halal within the nutritional and diet requirements. COVID in a weird way has helped, because the venues up and down the country, through the CPA and counties being a lot more aware of their customers and their participations, provisions have become normal. You know, we're already with the Australian team and obviously the England team, we're talking around Old Trafford and Headingley, and they're already aware of, you know, test matches being on Friday. So it has helped organically, but don't forget the internal education of administrators has been the biggest reward for me, where staff are going, okay, this is, you know, they've got Usman Hawaja or Mo in Ali, we've got to have this place, rather than a reactive response, which has been historic.
That's good to know. You're up to Birmingham today for the women's game later on. There has been a sea change in visibility around the women's game. I think it would be fair to say over the last, 5-10 years.
Yeah.
Has that sea change reflected in the general attitudes as well within the game?
In some situations, most definitely. I think when I first started playing and then moving into working in cricket, there was definitely a scepticism of the voice of a woman within the game. I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, those accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. So all of a sudden people felt as if we were going to be taking something away from the game. And I think the people that have allowed the game to flourish to the point where we've got, I think it's 18,000 tickets sold at Edgbaston this evening, they're the ones that have seen the positive effect to what diversity can bring to the table. So 2017, when we had the World Cup final here, it was just a different crowd to what we see here today. And I think I said it to you the first day that the report came out. The shop front window looks fantastic. Edgbaston will be heaving tonight. They had the Commonwealth Games there. We've got two of the best teams in the world. They are serious athletes with wonderful skill sets. People will be entertained, and they'll walk away going, we're heading in the right direction. And we were only just chatting off air. It's then we say, but, and it's always the but that comes in that we've always got to try and be aware of and acknowledge, to say, yes, we're heading there. And the transition has been, as you said, Mike, very, very fast and wonderful. But underneath it, once you get underneath that top layer, that's where the real work needs to start to be doing, to say to the people who have been in these positions for so long, you haven't quite got things right, we understand that. And that's either consciously or subconsciously. But we're also here to help you through this, because you've done some wonderful things for the game. We have a fantastic game. It just can be better and be more inclusive, and that's the balance I think we're trying to get to.
Pay equality, that's a significant part of the recommendations of the ICEC report. How easy is that going to be to achieve?
Yeah, it could be very, very easy. But the ripple effect could be really, really bad as well. And I think we need to be really brave to say, from the women's side of things, is we do want to get to that point, but we also acknowledge that if you do that immediately, you got to take that money from somewhere else, and we want the game to flourish. So it's not just purely about saying, hand us over the money and let's get to this point here. So I think there just needs to be some calmness in saying, how do we get there in a measured way and in a quick way, but that also then allows the rest of the women's domestic program to flourish as well. I know within Australia, the Australian women's cricket team had the option of really pushing in the last MOU for them to get paid a lot more up towards where the guys are at. But what they said was that's not going to help the next level and the level below. So let's say there's that pool of money, how can we put that across the game to ensure that we can get to that point of parity as quickly as possible?
Let's talk cricket in state schools, Rory.
That'll be a quick conversation.
It'll be a quick conversation. Well, I remember at my state primary in Manchester, there was a thriving Manchester Primary Schools Cup competition. We're talking late 70s, a long, long time ago. Clearly, those days are done. The question is, I mean, one of the recommendations in the report is to require and resource significantly higher levels of cricket in state schools. Well, yes, but how?
Yeah, it seems like there's a slightly utopian element to the report, in the sense that it reaches its reach beyond what cricket can do. I think Rishi Sunak might be here today. Maybe he's got a few ideas. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe we'll find out how he plans to sort that out. But this report is strong. It's kind of robust. It's been based on 4,000 lived experiences, but it's not the full story. Because I want to know about the 4,000 people who went to a cricket trial and got managed out of the game, who didn't feel like it was for them. We're hearing about people who stuck with it and love the game and kind of feel not loved back. But there's another 4,000 people who tried it, didn't feel like they were welcome and gave up. And that's my concern, is that if we look at some of the real outliers amongst English cricket talent of recent years, just look at someone like Adil Rashid, brilliant leg spinner. We don't have too many of them. Rehan Ahmed's coming through the same way. Liam Livingstone, outrageous hitter. Ben Stokes, he's leading the team in such a different way and with such a different approach. And they're all people who came through the non-standard route, the one that is in the report says feeds 70% or something of the funneling into the system. And my concern is that I'm not sure where the next versions of all those, Mark Wood, fastest bowler we've ever had probably. I wonder where the next lot is coming, because you come into cricket through your family, you come into cricket through the club down the road, and not through your school anymore. That, as you say, that's gone. So we're looking to get those outliers in a slightly different way. And if the number of people who feel attracted or welcome to cricket is smaller, the pool for the next generation is smaller. Do we have a Stokes, a Wood, a Rashid next time? I hope so. But we could do with a little bit of work in that regard, because cricket, sport, is about winning and losing. And England are going to find out about winning and losing probably the next 6 sessions. But equality of opportunity and feeling like you have a chance to get there and a chance to be out on that pitch, that's a situation where nobody wins unless everybody wins, as far as I'm concerned.
You mentioned Ben Stokes. He did his usual pre-match press conference where he addressed some of those issues. We might just listen to a clip of the England captain, Ben Stokes, before the game.
I am Ben Stokes, born in New Zealand, a state-educated pupil who dropped out of school at 16 with 1 GCSE in PE. I needed help with the spelling and grammar in this speech, and I am currently sitting here as the England men's Test captain.
That was part of a longer speech that he gave, but it's very interesting to me that he focused in on there that the problems he had in education, for example, he went on to say he's got 1 GCSE in PE, yeah. I think, and that vulnerability, which we've seen from him before, but he stands as a superb role model for the areas that we've just touched on, doesn't he?
Absolutely does, yeah. We know he's born in New Zealand, but his cricket learnings were in Cumbria, and he probably came from outside the path. I think I said to you last time, he wasn't future England captain. That wasn't marked on his bag when he was a kid. It's come from a different way. But I think it was very impressive that he chose to write that statement himself. He insisted on it. In fact, he had the media officer check the spelling. It was nice. But he should be someone who we look at and see that there are different routes. And if you are in charge of this game, if you're in the offices down the road here, you should be looking at him and wanting more of him. And I think Richard Gould and Richard Thompson, from what I've seen, are trained on to this. They seem to be coming from the right place. But the people who sat in their chairs before them said very similar words. The people who sat in the chairs before then said very similar words. Doing is harder than saying, and we're going to have to find out, because we've faltered on that before. And as you touched on, if we wholesale adopted the recommendations in the report, it would blow the finances of this game out of the water. They're going to have to take some choices, and it could be hard choices. These guys who are at the top, they're going to have to pick and choose which bits of fairness they pursue.
Can we talk about some of those choices then? I mean, there's a very interesting chapter 9, when they talk about pathways, which crosses all the areas that we've discussed. They say pathways should be free, which I firmly believe, and Yorkshire have done it. They may be the only county to have done it so far. Is that achievable? And B, that other recommendation about starting representative cricket slightly later to keep as many people in the pathway as possible, in order that those kind of advantages we've talked about elsewhere don't become so entrenched? I mean, just reflect each of you perhaps on pathway cricket, which you'll all have good knowledge of.
Yeah, I think what we talk about and the philosophy we have at ICEC is entry points, not exit points. And we've got people like Paul Walter, who were part of the pathway, came back in, Nick Brown, and it goes on and so forth. So for us, it's making sure what are the lessons of those exit points and what support mechanism needs to be put in place. Because if you can get that bit right, you actually have got a bigger threshold. We're also in a competitive pool of athletes at a very young age with other sports. So at 11, 12, 13, if they're not possibly at least around opportunity of a pathway, there's other sports at the moment sniffing away. So again, you've got to be very careful, I think, with that one. Having said that, I think each pathway works differently in different parts of the region, and they should be celebrated. There shouldn't be a fixated, this is how it's going to work, because you've got to have that local knowledge and insight. And I also say it is so different and a different landscape for boys and girls. So they might work differently for either or in each region. So personally, in my own experience, that's it. And the other thing that we shouldn't miss out in this debate and conversation is also the regulation of when you have to sign a player at 18. And the work that Saka and other and Aces and others are doing is unbelievable. But the reality is the game hasn't really looked at it genuinely strongly at 18 to 23-year-olds.
Yes, the slightly later entry points into the game. Arfan mentioned there the differences between girls and boys in the pathway. How do you see them, those differences?
Yeah, girls get into the game and get out of the game for completely different reasons to the boys, and at a different age group as well. So it's what I was saying before about a blanket program just won't cover it. In Australia, we come from a club-based system, so schools isn't such a heavy role, and I think when you look at girls cricket in England, that's probably a little bit more reflective of an Australian system than what it is for the boys over here as well. So that entry point for a girl might be they go down, they play that introduction piece at a school, and then parents might look for the local club. But all of a sudden, if the local club hasn't had a girls program there before, is all the coaches are male, the coaches say don't do a cartwheel while you're trying to bowl the ball, all those sorts of things. That's all of a sudden, that's an out straight away. But if you have attracted them in there, and then you get to a point where it's more sort of around that 14, 15 age group for the girls, and you haven't addressed the out section, then there's just automatically, and then all of a sudden the clubs turn around and they say, well, we've tried it and it didn't work, we can't invest again in it. So yeah, an understanding of the reason of the why and the enjoyment level is complete. Girls aren't as competitive as the boys to start with. It's a very social concept to begin with. So how do clubs bring in that social element, embrace that social element, which then attracts more volunteers, and it's a wonderful circle once you invest a little bit of time and knowledge in the understanding of the why.
I touched on the finances, or we've all talked about the financial challenges of implementing all the recommendations. Just that, going back to that issue, Yorkshire making the pathway free, yeah. Other counties will have to follow suit, won't they? The money will have to be found.
Yeah, if you look at the finances, it has blown a reasonable sized hole in Yorkshire's already difficult financial situation, but they decided it was a non-negotiable, and that's what they wanted to do. And I think that has to be the way. There is little touches in that direction. I know Lancashire this week via a sponsor have made all kit free, and that's a good start. But yeah, it feels like that's the trajectory. I think the recommendation in the report about funneling a lot of money in towards under 14 level and levelling the playing field there is important, because if you're selecting your generation of talent at 8 and 9, you're only selecting kids who've been privately coached. That's what you're picking from, because kids aren't doing that from a wider base at that age. You take it to 14, and then you're looking at something different. You're finding a couple of players who've found the game in different ways through their friends. If you're closing the door behind you at 8 and 9, you're going to miss out on a lot. I don't think someone like Raheem Sterling, if he'd been a prodigiously talented cricketer at his age with his background, I think he would have stopped playing cricket at 13 or something, or 12, and he wouldn't have gone on to play the national sport.